Hello, welcome. Welcome to our fourth community conversation for our comprehensive plan revision process, Housing, a Place for Everyone. These community conversations are intended to engage the public on key topics relevant to our comprehensive plan. This conversation is the fourth of 5 that we are holding, and again, it will focus on housing. And when planning for the future, it is important to make sure that we are prepared to meet the changing needs of our changing demographics and their preferences. This panel will hopefully answer some of those questions and shed light on key areas that we need to plan for. And to start, I'm going to give just a little bit of background on Shoreview's housing. So again, Shoreview, we're about 12.7 square miles. We have over 1,800 acres of parks and open space. We have over 1,200 acres of lakes. Our population is just over 26,000 as of 2015, and we have just shy of 11,000 households, and we employ just shy of 11,000 people. Now with our land use there, we do have majority residential, 39% here, but that also does include this multifamily residential total here. So majority of Shoreview is residential, so housing is a key topic that we want to talk about. And for our housing types here in Shoreview, as you can see, it is predominantly single-family detached, and we do have a nice range of townhomes as well as a multifamily. And again, these numbers are from, I believe, 2015, so this does not show a couple of our new housing developments that have come in. And when we're looking at housing for the future, we want to make sure that we address affordability, aging in place, increasing housing choice, and encouraging reinvestment in housing and neighborhoods, and mixed income housing. For affordability, this is one component that we wanted to make sure to touch on, because affordability is kind of got a stigma about it. It's not necessarily just those with Section 8 housing. Affordability is for everyone. When you look at some of these values of the 30% of the area median income, 50% of the area median income, or 80% of the area median income, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the types of jobs that this entails. For 30%, these are positions such as home health aides or funeral attendants. For the 50% of the area median income, it could be interior designers or bus drivers. And for the 80% of the area median income, and again, these levels are for a family of 4, positions such as accountants or police officers would provide incomes at that 80% of the area median income. So that's that 65,700. That's considered under the area median income, and these are the types of incomes that we're looking at when we talk about affordable units. It's not just those on Section 8 vouchers. It's not just those that are government subsidized. In Shoreview, we do have the different levels of rent for affordable to 30% of the area median income, 50 and 80. And again, if you were going to go for a 3-bedroom, it is considered affordable for a rent of $1,784. And if you're looking at home prices, a price of $235,000 is considered affordable for 80% of the area median income. Shoreview's median housing price is $249,000 as of August 2017. So there's a good chance that housing prices in Shoreview are not affordable to even those that are at that 80% of the area median income level. When we talk about the number of units that we have for Shoreview, there's just under 10,000 here, just shy of 1,900 for the multifamily, and we do have a manufactured home park up in the northwest corner. And for all of these units combined, we do have 672 that are affordable for the 30% of the area median income, 1,668 that are affordable to 31 to 50% of the area median income, and then we do at least have a larger chunk that are affordable to the 51 to 80% of the area median income at that 4,269. But the cost burden units are the part that we also need to worry about and make sure to address. And that's those that are spending over 30% of their income on housing. And again, the levels are 734, 630, or 511, and that's between that 51 to 80% of the area median income. And when we talk about our changing needs, we're getting older. In this 25-year span from 1990 to 2015, you can see that these age ranges were predominantly 25 to 29, and then about 45 to 49. And you can see that the population has aged. And so our needs are going to be changing, whether you want to age in place in your single-family home, whether you want to look at getting into a townhome so you have less maintenance, or perhaps you want to rent so you don't have to worry about the mortgage and you can go down south. And again, housing preferences just in general are changing. We've had 3 new apartment buildings that are either been built or approved and are started here in Shoreview in the past 5 years. We've got the Lakeview Terrace. We've got the McMillan down at 694 in Rice. And then the most recent one is Loden SV, which is at the former Deluxe campus by Lexington and 694. And then we also do have Applewood Point here, which is a co-op for 55 and older. And then we also have more Shoreview Senior Living that has been put in since 2012. We've had 2 different editions on that. And so just housing preferences are changing in general. They talk about millennials and how they don't want to buy homes. They talk about the boomers that maybe don't want to own a home and they want to rent. And so we need to look at how we can address a community for all. The age of the housing stock is also a concern that we need to look at, because we want to make sure that our neighborhoods, as they get older, are still being reinvested in and that they're still good quality neighborhoods. The majority of our housing units were constructed between 1960 and 1990, and majority of them are either ramblers or split levels. And then additionally, most of our apartment complexes, save for the new ones, are also built in the 60s or 70s. So what we want to ask is, how can we continue to encourage maintenance and reinvestment in all of these different housing choices? And then lastly, for that mixed income housing, with the median cost of housing in Shoreview higher than what is considered affordable with the 80% area median income and below, what can we do? We did enact a mixed income housing policy for new housing projects that if they were to get any sort of subsidy, that mixed income housing would be incorporated, or at least encouraged. And that would be to include affordable units, or whether it be for 30%, 50%, or 80% of that area median income. We want to make sure that there's at least some of those units incorporated if it's going to be the full complex, or if it's going to be a I'm blanking on the term for just a general rental unit where it's market rate. And so some of the questions that we've been asking were those 5, and hopefully this panel will certainly be able to help, and now you have a little bit better idea of what Shoreview is right now in our housing and what kind of challenges it's facing. And then tonight we do have Kathy Bennett from the Urban Land Institute moderating our panel. She has over 20 years of experience in community and economic development and currently works as a consultant to the Urban Land Institute Regional Council of Mayors, which is a nonprofit organization that actively engages the public and private sectors leaders to foster collaboration, share knowledge, and join meaningful strategic action to create thriving, sustainable communities. Ms. Bennett manages the Regional Council of Mayors Housing Initiative, which also partners to implement tools and strategies that support a full range of housing choices and connected, livable communities.
Thank you, Nikki. So I'd like to just take, before I introduce the panel, and I think it would be helpful for the panel, I'd like to just take 5 minutes to quickly go around and introduce yourselves. This is meant to be a conversation. We have some great panelists in front of you today. We'll have some questions that we'll have them answer, but we want this more to be a conversation. We want to make sure that we're going to be answering your questions. So if we could just quickly go around, and I don't know, does this have to be mic'd? Do we need to pass around a mic for people to introduce themselves? I think it's worthwhile to do.
I'm Susan Ringsdorf. I've lived in Shoreview since 1974.
I'm Deb. I've lived in Shoreview since 1982.
Sue and Robbie Seals. We lived in Shoreview since 1979.
Charlie Wilman, we've lived in Shoreview since 1986.
Scott Halstead from sunny Shoreview, lived here since 1993.
So you're new here?
Everybody else so far?
Hi, I'm Ken Peterson. I've also lived here for about 35 years, and I'm a member of the Planning Commission.
I'm Mark Pelletier. I've lived here since 1985.
My wife and I, Bob Hemming, we have lived here since 1973, when there were still covered wagons on 96.
Tom Lemke, and I have lived here since 1986.
Mark Pletcher, been Shoreview resident since 1977, I believe.
Beverly Proud. We've lived here since 1994.
My name is Dee Christopher. We moved here 2 years ago today for the wonderful schools.
My name is Anna Rickers, and I live on this block with my husband and 2 small children, and I've been here 4 years now.
I'm Scott Stitzworth. This is my wife, Sarah. We've been here since 2014.
Don and Teresa Hess, lived here since 1993.
David Eng, 1990.
Frank Horvath, who moved here 2 years ago.
Carolyn Kostelnick, we've been here since 1978.
Well, I think I must be the newest one. I've been here about a year, and I rent, so. Jennifer.
Well, great. I think that's really helpful just to kind of understand the longevity of the community. We have some new faces and probably mostly owners, but we do have a renter, so that's really interesting. I know cities really try to get a broad range of people to come to these types of events. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into some questions. We have some prepared questions, but then again, if you have a burning question before I move on, please just raise your hand, and we will get that out. And then also, I don't know, Gretchen, are there like white cards, like index cards, that if people don't necessarily want to raise their hand and ask a question, you can write it on a piece of paper, and we'll try to fold those questions in as well. So you are very fortunate to have just an awesome panel. I know all of these people really well, and I am really fortunate to be able to try to facilitate them because they are some of the best industry experts in housing and economic development. So on my right, Barbara Dacey with the Washington County CDA. She is the executive director. She oversees all aspects of the agency's program and services, including ongoing management of the agency's low and moderate income housing portfolio, the development and financing of new affordable senior and family housing, and administration of economic development and several rental assistance and homeowner assistance programs. She's also responsible for working with the agency board of commissioners to establish short-term and long-term goals and priorities in order to establish its mission. Barbara was also, for a long time, worked for the city of Fridley as in their community development department. She was a community development director, so she has local experience as well as county experience, and she's very, very knowledgeable and dedicated. To her right is Brad Tapke. He is with a company called, his own company that he founded, Gray Poley, a consulting firm that provides services to cities and businesses focusing on coaching, education, the facilitation of economic development projects, incentives, and the best economic development processes. But the way I know is him as Mayor Tapke. He was the mayor of Shakopee, Minnesota from 2012 and 2016. And when he was the mayor of Shakopee, he was also very active in the Regional Council of Mayors. And I know he has also been part of going around and speaking to business groups about the need for a full range of housing choices to help support economic prosperity in communities as well. And then the last but not least, of course, is Mr. Alan Arthur. He's with Aon, and he has so much experience in affordable housing. He's been with Aon since 1988. He leads the acquisition and development of close to 3,200 units, and I'm sure that's probably even more now in the region. He has 47 years of experience in housing and real estate development, and in my opinion, he's seen as a leader in developing very quality, affordable housing, and also he has been more actively involved in purchasing and maintaining and keeping affordable what we were to refer to as NOAA properties, natural occurring affordable housing. So he has a lot of experience in that area. So with that, means you're old. No. With that, I'm going to start off with Barbara with the first question. What is the value of ensuring that there is a full range of housing choices in Shoreview, and how can life cycle housing needs, and we'd refer to that as rental housing, first-time home buyer housing, regular single-family housing, empty nester housing, to senior options. How are those housing needs in the Shoreview residents, how can they be met when you're fully developed, and what are some options in that area?
Okay. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. First of all, the value of having a diversity of housing choices at various price points and different types of styles and so on, I think makes good common sense and economic sense. So if we start with common sense, if we think of community in general and who we are as individual families and households and so on, a diverse housing stock means that recent graduates from high school or college can find a rental option, or seniors that want to be close to us or our family systems have options to buy or to rent. It means that possibly homeowners can get rehabilitation loans and grants so that they can modernize their home. It can mean a family can have a stable home and therefore increase their earning power, focus on their kids' education. It means that children can stay in a school district for a continuous amount of time and not have to move often. And so from a common sense standpoint, the more diversity that a community has, then it can be more resilient when demographics change or when the market changes. And we've seen a couple of those trends, obviously, in the last 8 or 9 years in the marketplace. And I say it makes economic sense because on the slide that Nikki showed, when you added up the single family and the multiple family stock, that's the largest percentage of the land use in the city. So truly, housing is the mainstay of your local economy, and therefore it's the largest percentage of tax base. So both single family, multiple family, manufactured homes, all of that together is a significant portion of the economic success of a community. And then, of course, all of you that live in Shoreview then support the local businesses. So discretionary income is spent in the local economy. So I like to say that a strong housing program means a strong economic development program because it's all connected. So to me, that's the value of a diversity of housing in a community. And just to answer that question from the reverse, if a community doesn't have a particular form of housing, in Washington County, our issue that we're trying to do is create more reasonable cost housing, affordable housing for folks that work in the county, folks that commute in and work in the county. Their wages are comparatively lower than similar employees in other counties, and they can't afford to live in Washington County. We have the highest rent. We have one of the highest average home sale prices. So that's an economic advantage if we can get employees that commute into the county to live in the county. They're spending their discretionary money then in the community. They're not having to spend a lot of time in the car. And they're closer to work. Then the second part of your question was about ways to kind of attack how to make life cycle housing prosper in a fully developed community. And I'll just be very brief with this, but the 3 R's is what my experience has been: the rehabilitation approach, redevelopment, and the regulatory approach is maybe the city takes a look at what it can do from a regulatory approach to make sure that rental housing is up to code, for example, or a variety of rehabilitation programs to incent first-time home buyers to be able to live in Shoreview neighborhoods, or rehab programs for existing owners to make aging in place improvements for an aging senior in the household. And then, of course, to look at redevelopment opportunities where you can provide new investment, work with the private sector or nonprofit developers like Alan to address the needs that the community may have. So with that, I'll stop.
So as a follow-up, to that question, maybe Brad, as a previous mayor, I'm going to divert from our script. That's what I do. As a previous mayor, what have you seen as one of the important parts of having a full range of housing choices? And in Shakopee in particular, that's a growing community that maybe had to grapple with that in some way.
Yeah, definitely. So, thank you very much, again, for everybody being here. This is a really important topic that everybody in the community should be here, because there is a huge, right now in all communities, including Shoreview, but there's a huge gap that has been occurring in the last 10 to 15 years since land prices have gone up and a lot of regulations have increased. There's a big gap in that ability to have new housing in your communities that is affordable to kids who have graduated from college, and I say kids, but people who've graduated from college, people who are new in the community, those kinds of things. And it is really important to not have that that missing section of this life cycle housing. And so if people want to have starter homes, those kinds of things, those just in general are not being built as often anymore because it's too expensive to have those. And so there needs to be some sort of units that make up that gap and fix them. So like in Shoreview, there have been, since 2003 through 2015, there were about, and most every community in the metro has this same kind of story. There have been 520 some units that have been built since 2003, and of those, only 36, according to Met Council numbers, have been in that affordable range that Nikki went through in the beginning. And so those affordable houses for people who are going to come in your community and be first-time workers or be in the service industry and a lot of things like that is missing. And those that type of housing for new people in your community is really, really important for people to look at and to think about. And so in my community in Shakopee, it just hasn't happened. My house was built in 1997, and I was able to purchase it for less than $200,000. And since basically 2000, the mid-2000s, those types of houses haven't been built anymore, and that story is consistent through a lot of different suburbs throughout the entire region. And so it's really important to think about how that will affect your workforce, especially as our communities continue to age, and how we get to 2040 and what that will all look like. So.
Yeah, and Alan, as a developer, what is it that cities can do? How is it that cities can look at including different components within their comprehensive plan to be able to support the mix of housing, but then also what can they do when a project comes in the door?
Yeah, first of all, just to piggyback on something both Barbara and Brad said, is in our communities, about half the jobs that get created are those folks like Nikki talked about, which are, minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage or de facto minimum wage, $12, $15 an hour or thereabouts, and there's no room for them. Many of you, I would guess, grew up in communities. Shoreview was one of them back in 1973 and 80, of 14,000 people, 13,000 people, and there was housing for everybody at different economic levels. Now, unfortunately, the lower economic level is not covered by housing, so we're not, as pointed out, as Brad said, we're not building it. And so we got to figure out, how do we make room for folks who work our jobs, who take our kids to school on the bus in the morning, who deliver coffee to us at 10 o'clock and feed us lunch at noon and clean our offices after we go home to our own homes at night. And so that's what a lot of us are working on to try to do. I think we're going to face the worst 2 decades of affordable housing for lower income people that we've faced since the Great Depression in the 1930s. I know that's kind of a shocking statement, but that's what the social policy, I think, and market conditions are telling us. And if we look closely at them, I think that's where we're headed. So we have to start digging our way out of that hole now as quickly and as best we can. And so to answer your question, first, when you have a problem, you have to understand and face the problem. And I think our communities aren't looking at it clearly enough and understanding that it is here, that's really important. It is going to impact all of our quality of life when there's not room for everybody. And once you face the problem, there's a myriad of things we can do. We can support affordable housing of all kinds. We can the state actually gives a tax break for affordability, and I think cities can do the same, provide some tax benefits to create additional affordable housing in your communities. So there's a number of things we could do, support folks like us, and support a comprehensive plan that, again, talks about it, addresses it. It sounds like the City of Shoreview is having those discussions, so great to have you, great to be here to talk to you tonight.
So Brad touched on it a little bit with regards to how having housing choices is important to the economic prosperity of a community, and so did Barbara. And with Shoreview's population aging, many of the residents are staying in their home longer. Many of you want to age in place, and I think that is a necessity in some regards, and it's a preference in others. It's a necessity in the fact that if you were to move and even wanted to move, you maybe wouldn't be able to find something to move. And in most cities like Shoreview, the most affordable housing is the housing that's already here. And if there isn't a regeneration of that housing, then that puts more pressure on, or creates a bigger gap for those younger generations that you want to come into your community and eventually purchase homes, et cetera. And it's interesting that Greater MSP, it's our regional economic development agency. They say that the choices that we have for housing is going to affect our ability to attract workers. They predict a labor shortage of more than 100,000 workers by 2020 across all industry sectors. And with that labor shortage, you need to be able to open up and create new housing options all across the metropolitan region. And so Brad, I know that you kind of work on this and you've seen this firsthand. What is the importance of connecting this housing conversation also with the factors of employment and also transportation as something that a city like Shoreview and others should think about for their prosperity, their community, and the quality of life?
Yeah, thanks for this question. So I have a roadshow, for lack of a better term for it, that we go to business groups across the metro and talk to them about how affordable housing, locally available affordable housing, affects workforce and why that is important to the current workforce in everyone's community. And we talk about how what affordable housing actually means, and as we've talked a little bit about here tonight, it doesn't necessarily mean that it can mean, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's Section 8 housing or low-income housing. It's just workforce housing and the ability to house pretty much everyone through their life cycle and different economic means in your community. And so pretty much every time I go and talk to business leaders, the vast majority of business leaders really, they're the ones right now that are really feeling the crunch and are really feeling the pinch of not being able to hire all the people they want and at the skill levels that they need. And so, as you've seen, a lot of average wages have gone up significantly, which is a great thing, but people are, like there was just the unemployment numbers this past, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, that in the metro, there are a significant number more jobs that are open right now than there are people looking for jobs. And so, and that part, or a part of that solution, is not the whole solution by any stretch, is having more locally available affordable housing. And so business leaders, for the most part, understand that. And if they can have housing in their community where they are able to hire people from those apartment buildings and people that are across the street, those people will stay in their jobs a lot longer than jumping around from one to the next to get higher and higher wages. And so it's a really important thing for workforce to be recognizing this. And so I was in Cottage Grove and speaking to the Cottage Grove governance committee on their chamber. And so that's who I usually talk to, is the governing committees. And there was a guy who came in and he was not having any of it. I mean, he was like, affordable housing is not something that we need to think about. It's just lazy people that aren't able to do anything else. And he was adamant. Boom, this is where it is. And that's all he could get around his head. And so we just kept talking. And you can probably tell right now that I love a good fight, and so I was just kind of itching for this one with this guy. And so we were chatting, and they have a real estate firm in the neighboring community, and he lives in Cottage Grove. And so they have a real estate firm there, and we were talking about the fact that he was saying how hard it is to get receptionists to stay. That they've got them for 4 or 6 months, and then they go on to a new thing. And it's not a problem. I mean, they can always hire someone new as a receptionist in their business. But the very interesting thing that came out of that conversation, and it really dawned on him that locally available affordable housing would be important to him, is that as he loses those receptionists, that's where he recruits the new real estate agents from. And so he hasn't recruited a new real estate agent in the last 5 years because they are constantly cycling through those receptionists that are the people that are the feeders for their new real estate agents. And so it's a lot of different things like that. And he therefore realized that the city owns a good chunk of land across the street from where he is, and so it became very convenient to him all of a sudden to have locally available affordable housing right across the street from his business. But that's a whole different discussion there. But it was really interesting to hear and go through that cycle and have people understand the very, very real repercussions that are happening throughout the economy and our local economies right now by not having those types of housing available.
Question.
Yep, go ahead.
In relationship to your talking to businesses, is there any interest on the part of the businesses creating the affordable housing as opposed to asking government to provide it. So for example, the Medtronic, has a lot of entry-level clerical kinds of people. Maybe there's a possibility they could put up their own residential tower on their property, and maybe the CEO could kick in $24 million.
I like the 24 million part especially. In other parts of the state, there absolutely have been companies involved in providing affordable housing because they can very directly connect that to their employees. They can see that they're the largest employer in Worthington, Minnesota, and their folks can't find a place to live. It's a very direct connection. In the Twin Cities, it's been a little harder over the years because it's amorphous. You can't tell exactly where your people are living or can live or should live or can't live. That's changing. For example, we have a very strong relationship with Cummins Power, the second largest employer in Shoreview, actually. And we are talking with them about exactly that, working to help finance a major affordable housing initiative that we're working on. And we've talked to 3M, not far away from here. And so corporations are starting to see that it's in their interest, as Brad said, to get more involved in figuring out how to finance affordable housing. I don't think we're there yet, but it's starting to happen, and I expect it to happen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Brad, what's going on with Amazon down in your area?
That is a very good question. And that actually dovetails perfectly into this with what Alan was just saying, is that there are a lot of those conversations as to with the Amazons and with the big businesses and things like that about figuring out ways to have public-private partnerships to make those work and to find ways to find those partnerships to make more affordable housing, get it in the ground and get things done. And Amazon is a really good example of that. They would very much like to do projects like that. I don't want to say since I've been gone, but since I've been gone, our city council you might have seen us in the news a few times. It's a little embarrassing, but it is what it is. And nothing like that will happen currently because our city is against anything new or different right now. But Amazon is exceptionally innovative and wanting to do new things, and so it's really interesting, those and Shutterfly and our other big businesses. But where you see the pinch and the crunch in the workforce is not from those people. Those people are sucking up all the air in the room for those businesses for the hiring and getting folks in that. But the businesses that are actually suffering right now, because Amazon can afford to give you a $10,000 signing bonus and full benefits on day one, they can do stuff like that. But Turtles, our little bar and grill downtown, they can't do that. They can't give a huge signing bonus and to keep people working at the restaurant downtown. So where you're seeing this crunch on the workforce and where it's really critical to have housing as one part of the solution is on those small businesses, because those are the ones that are really hurting desperately right now on finding and keeping workers in their businesses.
Did we have another question? Yep.
Well, I was curious, how do you envision this working? As an example, my wife and I were driving out to the Pine Tree Apple Orchard and happened to go by Manning and 96, Highway 96, if you're familiar with the area. And there's this brand new housing development by Lennar. And the sign says, from the 400s.
Right.
Now, as I remember when I bought my house in the 80s, there, housing is built by developers. They don't seem to have a financial reward large enough to say sell a house for $150,000, but they sure do for $400,000. So how do you make this work, given that disparity?
So maybe Alan and Barbara, you could talk about what it takes to actually build a house, and that is what's driving the price, is the cost.
Yeah, so that's part of what driving the price. You could build a cheaper home, a more modest home. I grew, like many of you, I'm sure, I grew up in an 834 square foot post-World War II box, no attic, no basement, 6 kids. 864 square feet. We didn't know it was small, but now I look back, I know why my mom kicked us out after breakfast and wouldn't let us come back till supper. We can do some of that again, but if you're a developer, you can make way more money. It's with almost the same amount of work by building a house you can sell for $450,000 than one you can sell for $180,000. So that's your job, is to maximize your gain. So you're right, that's going to be a tough road to get developers to do more smaller houses. And so what you're going to see is we're going to have to develop more affordable apartments, townhomes. Let me give you a couple other facts. We have 30,000 what are called NOAA units, naturally occurring affordable housing units. I think Kathy mentioned it earlier. In other words, these are the housing apartments that were built in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s. We all know what they look like. The 3-story walk-ups, a lot of them are yellow brick. I mean, we know what they kind of look like. We have 30,000 now. We're losing, I've been saying we're losing 100 a week of those units. So that means in 6 years, those 30,000 units will no longer be affordable. What's happening is they're selling in a very hot marketplace, and the rents are going up $250, $300, in one case $600 a month. That's the average increased rent in that property. Some of the units in that property went up $1,000 a month, not to $1,000 a month, up $1,000 a month. That was in Edina, so it's a special situation. But even in Richfield, they're going up $300 a month. So earlier, Kathy asked the question, what can we do as communities? We can figure out how we put together packages, financing, and incentives and encouragement for folks who want to keep those rents stable in those kinds of properties, so that these minimum wage, slightly above minimum wage, starting workers, people coming out of college have a place to live before they become the homeowners. Just one more thing, to put that in context, if we're losing 100 of those a week, that's 5,200 a year. We create in the state of Minnesota a little over 1,000 truly affordable units a year. So we're losing 5 times a year what we're creating new right now. Plus, there are 13,000 mobile homes in mobile home parks in the Twin Cities. None of them will be here in 20 years. They will all be gone. That's some of the most affordable housing in our state, in our country. So I've just laid out that there's 43,000 units of affordable housing in our community in the Twin Cities that would be gone, I believe, in somewhere between 6 and 15 or 20 years. That's not a good thing. So we do have to get started on what we're going to do.
Do you have a question?
So I remember reading in the paper about Eon trying to help a mobile home park in St. Anthony Village that was eventually bulldozed, but they were able to build a single affordable housing unit or something with it for building?
Yes.
Is it possible for Aon to work with a mobile home park that's in Shoreview, so that when it happens to them, they can proactively get their act together and try to buy themselves as that law states?
I wrote that down earlier, so thank you, yeah.
Can I?
Yep, go ahead.
Back to the question before about what can be done about the affordable housing piece, is that's, in my opinion, that's why we're here today, is that the number one thing that can happen in all of our communities across the metro is understanding that life cycle housing and why it's important to have housing available at all different levels of economic statuses and walks of life and everything like that. That is the number one thing that we can do, and to get it into each and every city's comprehensive plan and make sure that it makes sense, having where they're located, and how, like in Shakopee, we shoehorned a bunch of affordable housing into stupid areas where people can't get access to grocery stores, and it's not walkable, and it's things like that. So making sure to find those places and to protect those places and plan for those places where affordable housing and these types of housing makes sense, and senior housing, and we're not talking about that as much, but it really falls into those same categories.
Let me take that question back there first, sorry.
So, I'm curious if who from the city is here today?
Nikki and.
I'm hoping you can answer. So, this makes a lot of sense to me, and I think, and I guess maybe I'm assuming too much that affordable housing here in Shoreview would be a very good thing for us, and we're fully developed. So that begs the question, where do we put these? And is it going to be over neighborhoods that are currently residential communities, and what does that look like?
That is a great question. As far as location, we can certainly put in these policy development areas that we are going through in our land use chapter currently. We're drafting it. We're picking areas where it makes sense, not necessarily over existing residential areas, although it may encompass some of those, but there are other certain areas that are redevelopable, like, for instance, some former dilapidated strip malls where apartments were going to go, or just certain areas where it makes more sense we'll plan for, but it's not something the city can really push for or make happen in itself, because these plans are till 2040, and so we just want to make sure that we're planning for what happens in the future, wherever the market is driven.
I'd like to take, if I could take that question too. This is a very common question I get in many communities, and I'm going to tell a story as an example. I went to Anchorage, Alaska, and I don't know if who remembers the bridge to nowhere that they're going to spend on $10 billion to put a big bridge across the sound there to go to another spot so they could build bigger Anchorage. And the city's fathers and mothers in Anchorage and some developers drove me through Anchorage and said, as they drove me through a 3-mile strip of one-story buildings surrounded by seas of parking, they said, see, we don't have any more developable land. So I'm quite positive that I could drive in your community without touching a single family home and come up with 10 places easily tomorrow that we could put 100 units of affordable housing on. So it seems like it's totally developed, but it depends on what you mean by developed. As Nikki points out, there's still a lot of one-story buildings in the city of Shoreview that are underdeveloped, underutilized.
Just one more thought about the last question about potential options for what I would call reinvestment or redevelopment. For an example, in the city of Mahtomedi, for example, in their old downtown, there was a vacant restaurant building that stood there for 6 or 7 years. They approached the CDA to help redevelop that for affordable senior housing. Other communities are taking inventory of unused tax forfeit lots or lots that may be owned by public organizations, city, county, evaluating if those could be sold, for example, to Habitat for Humanity, or if they're large enough for more significant development. And certainly the older commercial strip malls are now a potential. There's a development proposal, I believe it's in Columbia Heights, for example, that's being evaluated. There are all sorts of partnerships that the city could pursue with a community land trust, or doing scattered site acquisition and remodeling if homes or buildings are outdated market, and if there's a willing seller, there's always the opportunity to evaluate that. So those are a handful of examples that a lot of communities around the metro area have been implementing.
And then to continue on that, there are a lot of different land use pieces that can go into your city and how your city uses land. So there can be accessory dwelling units, which is mother-in-law suites and things like that. If you have a lot, a single-family residential home, and I haven't dived too much into the planning codes of Shoreview as to what is allowed and what isn't allowed, but there are a lot of great opportunities to add additional units to existing areas, or if there's a house that is run down and the ability to, instead of rebuilding that, tearing it down and rebuilding it as a huge single-family unit, as to having that be a duplex or a triplex or whatever that may be. There are a lot of different land use zoning programs that can be added in, and really to add additional units within what's already existing as well.
You know, after being in Shoreview since 1974, I mean, one of the things I would say the hallmark of Shoreview is it's progressive. So my question is, you know, if Shoreview goes to bat on the affordable housing, you know, takes vacant lots, conversion of buildings, whatever it is, and it sounds kind of parochial, but how do we make sure this benefits Shoreview and not Mounds View or somebody else that maybe isn't as interested in doing this kind of thing? I mean, if the city's going to put money, time, and talent into it, then it seems like somehow, and I don't know how that's done, you should benefit Shoreview.
I mean, I could maybe answer that in a way. Well, number one, it would benefit you because you'd be meeting your affordability goals through the Metropolitan Council, which then would open you up for more opportunity for assistance and options through there. It would benefit you because it would provide you with more workers for your employers. And anytime you would have a new development, it would benefit you in future tax benefits. And residents that would, if it was a rental property, it could benefit you in the fact that those are your future homeowners. Those are your future homeowners who would be buying your existing homes. So that's the way I would answer it, but anybody else?
I would just say, too, that through the comprehensive plan process, the city has the ability to comment on the plans from the adjacent jurisdictions, and that's purposeful in the law. So if you're not seeing the policies and goals that are supportive of that, then you have the ability to comment on that. And I want to pick up on one thing that Kathy said. Do not underestimate the symbiosis between rental and ownership in your community. They need each other. And it is very common for folks in apartments in a community to move up, so to speak, take that first step for a home buyer, and then the reverse happens where folks can no longer afford or want to upkeep their home and need to take advantage of the rental market. And then on top of that, I know that you folks are doing this anyway, but taking a look at the marketplace and looking what is happening, there seems to be more people in the rental market. There seems to be a lifestyle choice of wanting to have rental housing. And that's an opportunity that you can take advantage of. A new rental development creates a significant amount of tax value. So it leverages private sector interest for sure.
Question right here.
If you were to replace the mobile home park with low-cost housing, this was probably on the screen at the beginning, but it went by too fast. How much would the rent per month be for low cost? What is low-cost housing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of the, quote, affordable housing, end quote, that we talk about isn't particularly affordable. So yeah, it's very important to be very specific about what a particular project is going to do. The rents on mobile home park pads right now range from about $450 a month to about $650 a month. And there's no way that we can build a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom unit that would rent for $450 to $650 a month right now in new housing, not even a chance. We can sometimes build one that might rent for $850 a month. Now the pad, in addition to the pad, they still have some utilities. Maybe they wouldn't pay in the affordable housing, but still, there's still a gap between what we could build brand new. And a lot of the affordable housing that's getting built is $1,200 a month. It's still called affordable housing, and not even $850. So yeah, you're right. It's very, very difficult, which is why we should try to save those mobile home parks as much as, which is why we have on our strategic plan to save as many of those mobile home parks as we can.
So I have a follow-up question to that, just because it's been mentioned here a couple of times, is Section 8. Section 8 was created for a purpose, and I understand, and I've heard the statistics, that people on Section 8, about 60% of them actually work. So it is, I think it gets a bad rap. So maybe one of you could kind of talk about Section 8 and what that really means, and that is just a tool in the toolbox for people to be able to afford rents that, and still be able to make a living and afford medical care and daycare, et cetera.
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. First off, our experience is that we serve 1/3 of our voucher holders are families, 1/3 are folks with disabilities, and 1/3 are folks that are over the age of 62. And 50% of who we serve are children. So yes, folks on the program do have jobs, and the goal is stabilizing their housing in order so that the kids have a chance to become successful citizens. And the other value of the voucher program is that there are folks that for whatever reason, will not be able to own a home. There are folks that need to have the stability of that voucher. Now, it is not widely known, so I'm going to talk about it for a little bit, but federal funding for new vouchers stopped in the early 90s. So the new affordable housing that we're talking about is essentially what I would call locally financed housing. There's no pipeline of funding, I can assure you, from the federal government. It is, in essence, financed through private sector investment and tax credits, and there is local participation either by cities, county, or the state. So it really is about what a community needs and to serve it. In Washington County, we only have 600 households with a Section 8 voucher. So that's 600 times 3 people on average out of a population of 250,000. That leaves a huge vacuum of need for folks that need what I call reasonable cost housing. There's just plain, as everybody's talked about, inequity in the marketplace. One's wage has not kept up with the housing costs, especially in our county. So we're just trying to bring that cost of the housing down a little bit so that it's a more reasonable approach, and then conserve the other benefits that we've all been talking about. But truly, in Washington County, the voucher program serves certainly a purpose, but it is a very small tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. So to piggyback on that, during the Reagan administration, they started killing Section 8. And if that sounds political, it's not, because every single administration since then, doesn't make any difference if it's been Republican or Democrat, has killed, picked away at, or done nothing for the Section 8 program. In the 70s, Section 8 was the #1 financing tool to make new affordable housing. So we basically have the same amount of Section 8 subsidies today that we had in the mid-1980s, Then we were a country of 240 million people. Today we're a country of 315 million people. If you look at the relative decline of Section 8 versus our population, it is the exact but opposite trending arc as homelessness in our communities. I often get told, gee, the homeless have always been with us. No. For husband, we didn't have homeless people like we have now. Yeah, there were bums who rode rails, but they weren't homeless families, homeless children, homeless teenagers in our communities. We just didn't have that then. We do now. Let me ask you another question. We talk about subsidized housing as a fairly common term that's thrown around, low-income housing, affordable housing, workforce housing. Now, I already know the answer. How many of you folks own your own home? Yeah. Okay, how many of you folks live in subsidized housing? Raise your hand.
Have lived.
Every one of you who owned your own home live in subsidized housing at some point, because you probably took a mortgage interest deduction at some point. Most of you probably have your house is paid off now. But the mortgage interest deduction is actually the largest housing subsidy in the United States by far. Twice as much money, subsidy, gets put into home ownership in this country annually as all the affordable housing programs put together. So, and you know, that subsidized housing up to $1 million a year, subsidized second homes, subsidizes, you can get a mortgage interest deduction on a boat with a bathroom. I think we need to tweak our housing policy, not do away with the mortgage interest deduction, but tweak our housing policy so it's just a little bit smarter if we're trying to achieve housing and home for everybody.
Question right there.
Well, while you're talking about affordable housing, you apply more modest income. It seems to me that there's a relationship between transit and affordable housing. And Shoreview really doesn't have much for transit. In fact, unless you're in St. Paul or Minneapolis, you got very little for transit. So again, how do you make this work?
So I'm just, before Brad, you answer that, I'm going to give a statistic. Just 5% of Minneapolis-St. Paul residents live within 30 minutes of 100,000 jobs by transit or walking. This is important, just as important for downtown Minneapolis as it is for Shoreview or Shakopee and other regions, on how we deliver our transportation system so that we can provide access to jobs and access to communities. So,
yeah, exactly. And so with that, there are our transit availability. Every time you see in the news constantly about the Amazon headquarters and the HQ2 for Amazon. A big component of that is transit availability, and we have very little of that here, so it makes me laugh every time we talk about that piece and bringing this big 50,000 employer headquarters here when we don't have transit to really have access to those, give people across the metro access to those jobs. And so it's a big component of it, but that transit piece is just one of the many solutions for employers and for affordable housing that is necessary in local areas. And so I talk, when I talk to businesses especially, we talk a lot about locally available affordable housing to feed the needs of the local employers. And so there are, one of the slides that went through earlier where there are 11,000 jobs, 11,000 households in Shoreview. And so that's quite a few jobs for the community. So there are a lot of jobs that are here. Is it a one-to-one match? Absolutely not. But it is just one leg of that stool for really helping to get that employee base and having jobs and homes for people in your community. It is not a good solution. We have a long way to go. So you're spot on with the problem here, and there are a lot of different solutions that will hopefully, as we continue to move forward, work together to help make those solutions work.
So, and how that relates to the comprehensive plan is the integration between the housing section, the employment section, and the transportation section, and making that more holistic, because one doesn't work well without the other. You need all three different pieces of the stool. So, right
There
there.
was a lot of discussion of that topic at one of the earlier 2040 meetings, and the conclusion and officials have said, if a bus line drives by 500 houses and can maybe pick up one person out of those 500 houses, or you can go to one building or one small area and pick up 500 people with one stop, where do you think, or who do you think is going to get the bus line? So the more dense housing we build, the better chance we've got of bringing more mass transit in, and that ties into the low income, or I shouldn't say low income, the lower rent, because those are the people that are probably going to be wanting to use mass transit more than the 500 houses that they drive by in Shoreview. How many of us are going to say, I'm not going to ride a bus, I got my own car, I'm going to drive, so.
Yeah, our transportation future is going to change significantly, even in my lifetime, and I don't have that many years left. With self-driving cars, that is going to have a profound impact on transportation of all kinds. I don't think we can know exactly what change it's going to have, but it's going to be changed. We just tried to build a property. We wouldn't build this kind of property in Shoreview, where we wanted to build 90 units and no parking and 20 shared cars. So 20 cars that anybody in the property could just go down and use. You'd have to check them out. You have to check the cars out. It's a more transit-rich location than you're right, Shoreview is. But that's the kinds of things we're going to see. Why didn't we do it? The city was perfectly happy to have us do it, but we had to build 90 parking spaces for the 90 units because the lenders aren't quite there yet. The lenders won't let you build a property without having parking.
Right here.
I'd just like to mention the fact that there is something that all of us can do to help with affordable housing. My experience with Habitat for Humanity and also the Metropolitan Coalition of the MICA, which is Metropolitan Interfaith Coalition on Affordable Housing, hard to say, tells me that most of the time when we try to develop affordable housing, there's a great outcry of opposition from people that don't want it in their backyard because it'll bring those people into their neighborhoods. So what we can do, those of us that understand the need for it, is to provide a counter to those people that are going to say, don't build that here, and support it. Generally, people like us don't show up. And so the only people that are being heard are the people that oppose it.
I'm sure that all the panelists could talk about a story where local support for a project would have helped significantly.
Yeah, that how I got involved in working on affordable housing projects is toward the end of my term as mayor. We had a project that was a beautiful, fantastic, should have been perfect project, and people freaked. And it was just a handful of folks who had 3 5-acre lots that were near, not right next to, but near where this would have gone. And they kind of lost it over the whole thing, and it made me angry. And so that's how I've gotten into a lot of advocacy. But that's exactly what I do with the business leaders, is the goal is to educate, but the primary goal is to have, when an affordable housing project happens and wants to locate in Shoreview or in a community that we're talking to, that a few really solid local business leaders will have a great counteractive effect to 20 folks who just don't want something in their backyard. And so that's what we're working on, is building that business leadership quotient to help get projects like that done.
Yeah, just it is very important for the community to support it, what we do. Knock on wood, yesterday's paper had an article about a project we're trying to do, and we got rejected by the city council of St. Anthony Village. We're not done. That's just the second no. We've never not done a project in a community that we tried to do a project in. in part because we understand why people have concerns about affordable housing. If you watch TV or movies or 10 o'clock news, affordable housing and people of color or low-income people are not depicted very, very well. And so why would anybody want those people in their communities? So our job is to, and your job, if people care about it, at least job, is to just, form relationships, talk to people, show that it's our neighbors. It's our folks who they need a simple thing, a place to call home. And if you have those reasoned conversations and you have them long enough and, calm enough, you can get a lot of stuff done. But support is tremendous for us.
And then I'll go to you.
Part of the reason I'm here today, and I know a number of the people here sitting with me are here today, is we've seen potential plans for redevelopment of our neighborhood, and that's residential homes that would need to go away in order for more housing, high-density housing. We've seen plans. I mean, it's in theory, but a plan for this, and which is obviously concerning. So I guess my question is, well, two things. One, I am in no way opposed to affordable housing, but I'm very concerned if it would happen on my house. Sure. Also, where are some ideas of places you've seen in Shoreview? I mean, we're all a part of the Shoreview community, and so can you give us some thoughts on a good place, something where it's something like this might be?
Are you looking at me?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of the panelists have really studied particular areas of Shoreview. So I'm not.
I know where McCullough Park is.
Yeah. So I'm not sure they're prepared to kind of answer those questions. But I don't know if Nikki, you wanted to give a little bit more context or.
One site in particular, to give a little context about how, something could be on paper, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. It's certainly up to the owner of the property. For instance, the Shoreview Mall at Lexington and 96 has been on the city's vision and the city's plans for redevelopment because it's an underutilized 10-acre parcel. That's a big sea of parking lot with a building way back. It's just not very functional the way it is. That's been on our plans for over 20 years, but it's completely up to the owner as to whether or not they want to redevelop, if they want to sell, if they don't want to sell. It's their choice. The city has no authority even to do eminent domain for some private development or project of that nature. These plans are just more so we can prepare for the future if a developer does come along, or if you or someone else decides that they want to sell their property to redevelop, we can help guide it to its best use in the future.
There was a question right behind you, ma'am. He was first, sorry, and then I'll come to you.
Maybe a change of pace. We've talked a lot tonight about affordable housing. Now, the goals of sustainability and quality of life, what are the other programs and incentives that will help build quality of life and sustainability? Programs that work, programs that have not worked.
Well, I'll start out and then maybe you folks can chime in. In general, when it comes to rental construction, the building industry has certainly evolved and improved. Sustainable materials like hardy board and energy programs from utility companies, green criteria adopted by the state. A lot of those initiatives are filtering through financing programs at the state and regional level. So folks are looking at sustainable building options as a means to, over the long term, ensure that it's a 50-year decision in general. Was that what you were getting at, or?
I was thinking about just the overall, let's say, desirability of the community, why people want to come here, they want to rebuild, they want to do build development. What are those things that cause this community to be vital and maybe to be more vital? Things that increase quality of life, those programs with incentives that have worked or not worked to deal with quality of life and the overall maybe life cycle sustainability of the community.
just one other example is to identify what is the best parts of living here in Shoreview and creating that brand for the city, the communication platform. What is it about the neighborhoods and why people like to live here, and communicating and getting that across, and educating all sectors, the business sector, the faith communities, getting everybody on board about what it means to be here in Shoreview, and the branding work, the communication issues, and then some specific examples of areas that you're trying to entice development in, connecting the dots between economic growth and the amenities, the community center, the park, and recreation, and that you're open to folks to come and live here. I've seen communities in the county kind of pursue that and have a coordinated communication strategy. That's one example I've seen.
Yeah, and the process that you're embarking on right now is a huge component of that, of achieving that livable, sustainable, walkable, whatever you want to call it, lifestyle that you want to see here in Shoreview. It's taking what is best in your community and what you love about your community and accentuating that and trying to extend that to other areas where it may not be exactly what you want to see in 2040 in ways down the road here. And so with that, it's what I always explain to people with the comp plan is it gives the residents and the citizens a voice and the city an ability to set the table and show what it doesn't necessarily bring people to the table. It doesn't necessarily, it rarely forces things to happen. But what it does is it shows that vision and shows that future of what it needs to be, as Alan talked about with self-driving cars. There's going to be a whole different ball game here pretty soon, and Target is not going to need as many spaces. Target doesn't need as many spaces as it has right now, so it's being able to show and give the tools for taking what you love about your community and accentuating it and even growing that further throughout.
Just a couple of comments. We do a lot of workshops in communities like Shoreview, and we have done one in Shoreview. We've done over 60 workshops around the metropolitan area where we bring together a panel of developers like this and have a conversation with the City Council Planning Commissions. And your question comes up all the time. And what I have heard most about what makes a good community and what makes a community that somebody's going to want to invest in is connectivity. So yes, you may not have good transit service or transportation service, but if you have connectivity so people could walk places, but also biking places, biking has become huge. The ability to be able to connect trails to places in interesting ways is something we hear. The city to be open to supporting innovative ways of doing housing, of allowing solar panels, of allowing companies to do things differently, and supporting your school district. Having a strong school district is one of the biggest attractors of housing that anybody could have. So ensuring that your school district is engaged in your conversations. And it's also, and this is going to lead to my next question for the panel because I want to make sure we get this question in. It's about supporting areas at a higher density that then you can get and achieve what you want as a community. So with Shoreview, with their average density of about 3 units per acre, what would be a higher density that could help a community to sustain the property values, to be able to provide options for additional transit access, to be able to fund the connectivity of trails, et cetera. Barbara, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, the challenge with lower density is just cost in terms of infrastructure and utilities. The more pavement requires asphalt, and oil costs are going up, and the ability to recover those costs at a lower density, the city's in the position of having to specially assess that. And so over time, with a significant amount of development at a lower density, eventually everybody gets saddled with those costs. So our experience has been that, and truly, something at anywhere from 8 to 15 units per acre is considered medium density. Is certainly more efficient, but we have had developments that are 30 units per acre, but you just think of that number, it's like, oh my gosh, that's so, that's very high. But it all depends on the context of where that building is and what is going on around it. And as a matter of fact, a number of years ago, Alan took me on a tour of some of his infill developments and had us gather in the middle and say, what do you think the density is? And I completely overshot the density. So there are so many factors in terms of design, but if you have a 5 to 10 acre spot, you can really do some really cool, innovative things to create a sense of place, and that feeling of, oh my gosh, this feels like too much people is really not there. So.
Alan, if you have any follow-up.
Yeah, and what Barbara really meant is she undershot. I use that example. So some of the greatest neighborhoods in the world, and I don't know how much traveling you've all done, have densities way higher than 3 to 5 units per acre. If you name one, I'll tell you what the density probably is. When this 10-acre site was mentioned, just a few minutes ago by Nikki, what went through my mind is we can do 500 units on that 10-acre site, 50 units per acre, and it'll be a fantastic place with lots of green space, ton of green space. Now, I wouldn't suggest that we would walk into Shoreview and try to do 50 units per acre because that's too shocking. For most suburban communities, but we can easily do 50 units per acre. As a matter of fact, we've done a lot of research about that. 50 units per acre is easy to do and have plenty of green space, plenty of amenities, and make it feel really good. The place that Barbara talked about, she went into, I took many developers. It's more about design than it is about the actual density, frankly. Developers, architects, planners in that site, and I asked the same question I asked Barbara. I said, how many units per acre do you think this is? And people consistently said, oh, I think you've got it up to 25 or 30, maybe even 35 units per acre here. And I pointed to public housing that's about a half a block away. I said, how dense is that? Oh, I don't know, that's probably 50 or 60 units per acre. Different in design. Theirs was 62 units per acre, and ours is 62 units per acre. We did the first major mixed income housing project in the Twin Cities, where we had both market units and affordable units, and it's still working great today. That was done in 2000. So that was the property Barbara's talking about. But it didn't all have to be 50 units per acre, but way more than 5. They can still be great places, absolutely great places to live.
Do you have a question?
I just had a minor question about what is the density in units per acre that would typically make mass transit viable?
That's a really good question.
I think
the answer to that. Somebody has done that research, I guarantee.
Yes, they have. There is a website if you Google visualizing density, and I have a presentation that we had a speaker come in from the East Coast that laid out the different densities you'd need to like support a local grocery store, and then the density that you would need to have to be able to support transit. And I can send that to Nikki that outlines that, but the website, if you just Google visualizing density, it's a really great resource to kind of understand what different densities look like, and you may be surprised, and there's even a quiz that you can take that identifies the project and you guess what the density is, and I failed it. It's really good just to kind of understand what different densities mean and educate, but I'll get that to Nikki.
Yeah, just to be clear, I don't think Shoreview should try to be a really super dense city. As a matter of fact, I think it should just think about making room for people who work all the jobs in the city, and I think it should talk about amenities, to get to your point about what makes a great quality of life. It's the amenities that these folks have already talked about. Parks, as many parks as you can stick in the community. Make sure, ideally, I think the research shows if you have to go more than 3 blocks to a green space, is not as good a place as it otherwise would be. So I think, all that connectivity that was talked about, that's what Shoreview should be shooting for, to be a super dense community, obviously. But not be afraid of density on this 10-acre site, because I'd like to come back and talk to Nikki about it.
I'm going to take this question here and then there, so go here first.
My question was for Nikki. There's something being built on Snail Lake Boulevard where the old Snail Lake Club was, and I was wondering what that was. And also, there's something being built across the street from the Green Mill, and I was wondering what that is.
Sure, absolutely. The Snail Lake Boulevard, it's a smaller lot, and it's actually going to be a single-family home.
Oh, good.
They did have to go through planning commission and whatnot, and it is not going to be near any affordable range, no, at this point.
It's right on the lake.
It is very close to the lake. They had to get variances and whatnot, but yeah, that's what's being built there. And then across from the Green Mill at the former Deluxe Czech printing, their manufacturing plant was actually taken down, and that's the most recent development, that Loden SV. It's going to be a total of 412 apartment units, 206 each phase, and they are incorporating 12 units of affordable housing in each of those phases as well.
Who's doing that?
Greco?
Oh, Greco is.
Fantastic.
My questions are about the types of rehab or support that we can provide for existing housing, and there's 3 areas. One is the first-time homeowners, because those of us who were built 30 or 40 years ago had something called sweat equity. We could work for that $20,000 or $30,000. Now people have to come up with $50,000 and $60,000 and $80,000 for the first-time homeowners. So what can be done for them? What can be done in rehabbing aging in place so that people can take the split entry and people who don't have a bedroom and bathroom on the first floor to make that aging in place? And the third, which I just came up with tonight when you mentioned it, is that we have one of the best mobile home parks in the Twin Cities. It's really an excellent place. What can we do to support that mobile home court to make it the last one in 2020 or 2030 to still be there? Because it's great, but what can that, there's 3 different areas.
All right, I'm going to start with the last one first.
Okay.
So the Met Council is evaluating, and I believe they have issued the criteria for a pilot program to assist manufactured home parks with infrastructure improvements. Many of them were developed a number of years ago, and sewer and water facilities are aging, and that's a significant improvement for manufactured home parks. So I think that would be one thing to monitor, keep track of on that. Number 2, I don't know who the owner of the park is, but if he or she were to sell, there is a cooperative fund, there's a non-profit that's a resource for financing. Of course, folks like Allen and Aon are another source. State law regarding relocation assistance, those types of issues, or the ability for manufactured home park folks to match an offer is certainly in place, and the statutes have been improving on behalf of the residents. I also believe that Minnesota Housing, I could be mistaken, has a rehab program for manufactured homes. So supporting that, making sure that that's known in that community is good. The second item was aging in place improvements. Minnesota Housing, I believe it's called the Community Impact Fund, has a program aimed at single-family rehabilitation. And this is something that the city can evaluate options for, but many communities provide their own funds to match the state funds to identify a certain neighborhood within the city to look at certain types of improvements for single-family homes. For first-time home buyers, for example, the city of Woodbury took the initiative. They came up with their own down payment and closing cost assistance for first-time home buyers within the city, up to $25,000. There's all sorts of criteria along with that, the value of the home, et cetera. But so what they're doing is trying to help shape the investment, which it sounds like that the city is trying here to address. Did I forget one of the three? Okay. All right.
What I have to say about this, so two things. One, with the first-time home ownership. First-time homeownership has become exceptionally difficult, especially for college graduates, because a lot of people who graduate from college have so much student debt that they don't qualify for a mortgage. And so that's why it's really important to have these rental units in place in your community, so you can, there's just tons and tons of data about how when a family, so you have newlyweds or whatever that may be, comes into your community, and especially once they hit that point of having a kid going into the school district, that they're there and that they're stuck and they're not going to leave your community. And it's a very, very great thing for communities to have, is to have those, the different steps and levels, so that once that college debt becomes reduced, they can become a first-time homeowner. It happens later in life than it did in the 70s, 80s, 90s, those kinds of things. But it still happens. So it's just a different type and a different way to look at it. As well, another way, and this isn't exactly what you were getting at, but is to have available options on the other end, so people, instead of aging in place in their homes, have options where they can move to that works for them to open up that home as available for first-time homeowners. And so, like in Shakopee, we're working really hard on getting condos where we have just a ton of rich farmers in Shakopee, because everybody made a ton of money when 169 came through, and they're all in their 60s and 70s right now, and they don't have anybody but the mom and dad who are living in the house still, but there's nowhere for them to move to, because we don't have a type of housing in town that's available for them to move to. So it's having both ends for people to move into and make those houses available to people, but have looking at the first-time homeownership a little differently than we used to.
Question here.
To piggyback on Ken's question for aging in place, as we started with, the most common home in the Shoreview area are split entries. They're not very friendly for aging in place. We've had a lot of friends and neighbors that moved out of Shoreview to places like Woodbury, White Bear Township, because they have these two-level condos, two-level townhomes. The first level is everything you need. The second level, would they have for grandkids to come visit and their own kids. With the amount of split entries we have, there wouldn't be enough areas to build places in Shoreview for people to want to age in place. But are there ideas that we can share with residents in Shoreview, because maybe you just can't picture it, of how they could rehab their split entry home into a place they could age in.
A number of years ago, there was a remodeling plan book put out for split entries, and there's a separate edition for Ramblers, and that was a collaboration between many communities, and I can't remember if Shoreview... Okay, great. So with the aging in place phenomenon, you know, it might be worthwhile to take another look at that. But I wanted to comment on this because we have it on our website, and it is the most popular part of our website is folks download the PDF on the split entries. It's it's been a while since I've looked at that from the aging in place perspective, but universal design is the phrase for those types of improvements. And I know that Minnesota Housing as well is really trying to encourage programs about that. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm going to go to this question, gentlemen, and then to you. Go ahead.
Just one, and even Charlie, we have a jewel here in Shoreview called the Shoreview Housing Resource Center. And if you have never gone to this facility, visit it. Is that
I think it's closed.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That has been just a gem. They have knowledge on all the programs. They have designs and plans to convert the split level into a living more. When is that closing?
It's closed.
It's already closed?
It did close, or it's in the process of closing. The Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation decided to close.
I think in December is closing.
But I know that they've at least scaled back. They're not taking any home loans. I'm not sure if the construction consultation is still there, but we're in the process of shopping for an alternative to provide those same types of services, because we want to continue to provide.
I would highly encourage the city to add it to that, because that was, a lot of people did not realize what was all there, and if you visited them once or twice, you would just, it was amazing the information that they had and the knowledge of all like first-time homeowner programs and where you can get money for first-time home. That was all at their disposal there, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful center.
No, it's great to hear that feedback, because again, we're shopping for that, but we like to hear that it was used and that the services they provided were what the services that the residents want too. So, great.
Your question, sir?
So we talked about aging in place, and I'm a prime example of that. But we have a problem in the state of Minnesota. We have rural areas that are suffering a lot. Maybe it's time for us, some of us seniors, to take off to the rural areas, help build up things out there, put demand on for medical cares and services and create jobs and things out there, but provide openings for housing, etc. in here. And maybe our businesses, we've got some good-sized businesses, maybe they could come in, buy a house for their employees, etc., and maybe make some little improvements or whatever needs to be done, and we can still keep it affordable without bulldozing it with a D9 paint scraper and putting a $600,000 house up.
You're the first aging person that talked about moving into colder climes instead of Florida or Arizona.
That's wrong with you. Well, you're probably going to move out to a lower taxed area, and all kinds of things would go out into the rural areas, probably lower housing costs and lots of things, and you can go out and volunteer and work in a rural area.
I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then we have one final question for the panel. So, gentlemen, you're here.
One area we haven't talked about as far as Shoreview has a great deal of affordable housing, and it's called Children Living in Your House. And not to make light of it, but it is a transitional housing situation. So in Shoreview, what's happening is is, as you've talked about, the cost of our housing. We have a lot of houses that are 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. Because of the way the codes are set up, children live there for a while, and then because of the way the construction of the home, it isn't very easily converted to a two-resident situation where somebody could age in place and maybe have their own living space and have a child, maybe through some kind of a financing program, get a mortgage assistance in order to purchase the home with some kind of a system where the folks or grandparents, whoever. So one of the interesting phenomena that's happening in Shoreview right now is that we're not 97% white anymore, Caucasian. And one of the things I've noticed is a lot of the people that are moving into Shoreview oftentimes live intergenerational from other parts of the world. And this is a lesson that we have to learn, that somehow the first-time homeowner doesn't have to live out here all by themselves, and then grandpa's got to live over there all by themselves. Somehow, other countries have kind of figured this housing issue out by sharing housing, but their housing design is a little different.
Yeah, I'll just point out that that's not new. All the Swedes and Norwegians did exactly the same thing. It's just been 50 years since we were doing that. So it's, you're right, it can be done. I want to also say just one other interesting thing. There's an organization, a nonprofit in Columbus, Ohio, that actually pairs young families with 50 to 65-year-old empty nesters in larger 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom homes. And the empty nester gets, $600 or $700 a month rent, which helps them in their lives. And they usually have big families. They're families with 1 or 2 children, not 4 or 5. And works out for both parties. So and they got 500 of those and they've only had one that didn't work out, that they've had to split them back up. So it's an interesting dynamic.
And accessory dwelling units do not need to be a separate property on one parcel. An accessory dwelling unit can be within the home. So if that is something that's important, maybe that should be something that the city puts in their comprehensive plan to outline ways to accommodate co-housing, accessory dwelling housing, because there are some codes that cities would want to have assurances to be able to able to make sure that it fits within the neighborhoods, et cetera.
And I think a really great thing that these last couple questions have been getting at is that as our communities age and change, having flexibility in your community with code, and this is going to make the planners just cringe and probably throw things at me, but having flexibility and having the ability to do things differently than they've always been done, it sounds like that needs to be a key component of, as you guys are moving forward with your comp plan, to be able to do those kinds of things, to be able to have flexible financing programs from the city and having flexible codes and being able to do things with accessory dwelling units and that kind of thing that you guys are just from this conversation at least, in this microcosm of who you are as a full community, is ready for those types of things. And so as you're moving forward with your comp plan, make sure to keep those things in mind as you're working on where you're going to go in 2040. And nothing got thrown at me so far.
Yeah. One last question here, and then we've kind of answered it, but I want to ask the final question for everyone so we kind of wrap it all together, but go ahead.
Mine is really just a comment. You were talking about how important it is to have the low-cost housing be rental property, and I just wanted to say that is so important because I own some rental property in Coon Rapids, and I'm on one of the association boards, and the management company is always telling us that too many of the units are rentals, that we need, that we need to have more ownership in the property. But what they don't want to hear is that those people can't borrow enough money to buy a home. So it doesn't do any good to have low-cost housing if they're not rentals, because you put too many people out of housing altogether without rentals.
Can I comment on that, Kathy? So I think we eventually are going to come to a different kind of housing provision structure. It might be 50 years, we might start in 15 years, where there's a hybrid between what is rental and what is home ownership. It's been done with co-ops a little bit, but they haven't really worked. We don't have time tonight to talk about them, but I think there are some cooperative type of structures, more like Land O'Lakes or Ocean Spray Cranberry, in the housing world instead of in the business and our agricultural world, that will be done eventually. We're talking about it nationally with some of our peers about how we put our 3,200 units in a large cooperative venture where the residents not only can be renters but can also provide capital when they have the capital to start creating some equity for themselves in the entire venture. It'd be beneficial for the co-op as well as for the residents themselves, and they would also have this feeling of ownership, a sense of ownership, and there's real ownership in the, but we're always off from doing it in a functional way. We've done it in many dysfunctional ways, the co-ops, and we've learned from them, I hope, and hopefully that'll start to change, but it's a really good point you make.
So I'm going to have a final question. Alan, you're going to start on this, so keep the microphone. The demand for housing changes over time from condos and townhomes to senior housing, and now we're in the middle of an apartment boom. What do you foresee as the future of housing, both in terms of housing choices and styles being offered, but also housing costs and values in the next decade?
Well, I said earlier that I think we're headed towards the toughest 2 decades for affordable housing for lower-income people that we're facing since the Great Depression. Even if I'm half right, it's not going to be good. I think the Twin Cities is on a market run that will last at least 20 years. I think we're, if not more, I think we're Chicago 40 years ago. So if you look what happened to housing costs and prices, if you look what has happened in Chicago area to mobile home parks, et cetera, to affordable NOAA-type properties, it's going to happen here. And the only question is, what are we going to do about it? I think we will see more apartments, although I don't quite jump on the bandwagon that millennials won't want to buy single-family homes. Come on, the apples don't fall that far from trees. Maybe 7% of them won't want to, but when they get 2 kids, they're going to want a single-family home. And so it's a cyclical thing, and there's a process, and as Brad said, they are doing it later in life, but it's going to happen. But at some point, we have to be more, I think, we have to find our land, our open space precious. We've got to be careful not to wipe out all of our open space, and to do that, we have to have more density in our communities, in every community, including Shoreview.
Yeah, that eventually, as all the new apartments that are being built today, especially the high-end apartments and those kinds of things, eventually, somewhere, I don't know exactly what the stats are, but 20, 30 years down the road, those will turn into affordable housing at some point. Because there's going to be new stuff that comes along as that cycle continues to churn and move forward. But in the next decade, what we're really missing is that affordable component. And in my opinion, the only commodity that a city has that they can deal with and have any control over is their land use, the number of jobs, the number of people per square foot, per acre, whatever that is in your community. You have to protect that, and you have to help show for future generations that you care about those kinds of things in your community and where you can go, because you can't control what businesses come and those kinds of things, but you can control how that land is being used and how flexible you are with that land and what you want to have happen. And so as I look over the next decade, I see a lot more cities are coming to the realization that they have to have a lot more flexibility and the ability to do things different than they have since, World War II, when we changed all of our suburban housing development patterns and those kinds of things. And so I see that as one of the major things happening in the next 10 years is the ability to have cities not build everything, especially in the suburbs, as 3rd and half-acre lots, and working on density and finding ways for people to live in their community from start to finish, and finding out why that's important and how to capture that. And so you guys are well on your way to having those discussions, so I commend you for that, and thank you for having us here today. I appreciate it.
I would like to say a couple of things. First, I agree that Twin Cities are in a transition timeframe, and my suggestion would be to grab it and to be open. I don't think you can be aggressive or assertive enough when it comes to housing issues and housing programs. I think again, it's the mainstay of your community, and it's just extremely important. And I know that industrial parks and bike trails and transit, all of that is important, but it all starts with housing, and to evaluate ways that the city can invest and leverage. The second thing I would say is to reach out to both sectors, the private sector, the nonprofit sector. I think the government, each of those sectors have a distinct role. Your community process and elected officials can decide what the right mixture is, but there's so many opportunities to work with private developers and the business employers and the school district, nonprofit organizations like AON. The answer is in the room, and so to the extent that you can keep an open conversation and keep it going and be specific and strategic with some ideas, I think in the long term, the City of Shoreview is going to be just fine.
Great. I think we should all thank all the panelists, and I would like to say I think the City of Shoreview, if they remain thoughtful, flexible, and have a clear vision, that they will continue to grow and prosper with like-minded people in the room and stay on course. So thank all of you for your time. And Nikki, do you want to close?
I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This was a really great conversation, and I hope that we got most of, if not all of your questions answered, and perhaps got you thinking about other questions that you may want to ask. And please visit destination.shoreviewmn.gov if you haven't already. We do have some surveys from our previous conversations up there. We have videos from our previous conversations up there. If you were not in attendance, please, if you get a chance, watch those, or at least participate in those surveys so we can get that feedback so we can help make this plan part of what the community vision is. And I will make sure to get that Split Visions book up there. I don't know, or recall at least if it has anything as far as the life cycle, but it does at least give some ways to renovate some of those split level homes. And then I'll also that visualizing density, I'll put a link up to the website on the website as well, and then hopefully Kathy's presentation as well. Thanks again.